let's make some continuous bias binding. You need to use bias binding on projects that have curved edges or scalloped. And the reason we do that is because the bias edge of the fabric is actually stretchy. So we need our binding to stretch around curves. The first thing I've done is cut the largest square possible. You can go on the internet or ask at the store. There is a chart telling you what size of square you need for however many inches that you require for your project, cut at whatever width you're doing. So for the project I'm using now, I have a 24-inch square of fabric, and I'm going to cut 2.5-inch bias strips. So the first thing I've done is marked my top edge and my bottom edge with 2 red pins. And then I've marked my left side and my right side with 2 yellow pins. It just helps to keep our pieces straight, which edges are which when it comes to putting them together to sew. The next thing I need to do is to cut along the diagonal of my square. So I've lined up my rulers. This is longer than one ruler, so I butt my rulers together and then I move them as a unit. So you can choose to draw this line and then cut it, but I'm just going to go ahead and cut, keeping my rulers together. All right, now I have 2 large triangles. Now I want to join my 2 red pins with my other 2 red pins. I knew there was going to be a thread not cut because that's where my boards meet. Right sides together. So I'm going to pick this up. Now my 2 red pins are together and my 2 yellow pins are still on the outside. I'm going to line this up, pin it together, stitch it with a 1/4-inch seam allowance, press that seam open, and then come back and show you the next step. Okay, I've got my 2 pieces together. I've stitched with a 1/4-inch seam allowance and pressed that seam open. Here's what it'll look like now. Here are my 2 biased edges. Here are yellow pins, and here are yellow pins. And we're going to work on the back of the fabric. Oh, I'm just going to turn it this way. All right, yellow pins, this is where the red pins were. These are now my biased and stretchy edges. My binding is going to be cut 2.5 inches. So I'm simply going to take a good marker. You need to see these lines later, so make sure you use something that you can see. I'm going to measure 2.5 inches, draw my line, move my ruler, continue my line, and draw lines all the way across my fabric. I have my lines drawn already. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines drawn already. And now it's time to refold my fabric and stitch another seam. I'm going to bring these 2 yellow edges together. Right sides together, so it creates a mess of your fabric. And I have lines here and lines here. And I need to match those lines, but offset them by 1. So I'm going to find my first line, move to my second line, and line it up with the first line here. And I want to pin them where those 2 lines intersect at the 1/4-inch mark. And that's right there. And now I'll move to the second line. So there's a line here and a line there, and they intersect at the 1/4-inch line and pin. So I'm going to pin all the way across, making sure they line up at that 1/4 inch, and it does. Once I have it pinned, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and again press it open. All right, I've got that seam sewn and pressed open, and I will just mention that you should not draw your lines with a friction marker because your lines will disappear when you press. I usually just use a regular pencil or even a ballpoint pen because you're not going to see it at any point. So this was the original seam that we sewed, and you can tell because the stripes are running horizontal, and this is our biased edge, and you can tell because the stripes are running the same direction. So the next thing I'm going to do, here is my offset seam, is simply take my scissors and cut on that line. And I'm creating 2.5 inch bias cut strips, and that's going to look fabulous when I put this binding on my tree skirt. I'll come back when I'm all done cutting. Here I am right at the end of cutting my bias strips. So you'll see the piece on the left clearly is my extra. It's not 2.5 inches. So I'm just going to snip that, and it joins up here. So you just need to take your seam ripper and pick that seam out to remove that little piece. And you don't just want to yank it because this really is a biased edge. A couple more stitches there. There we go. So this is scrap because it's not quite big enough. But here is my continuous bias binding. All right, let's head back and finish up that tree skirt.